Welcome back to Sleep Flow Studio. Tonight I invite you into a world hidden beneath polished floors, behind carved wooden panels and under grand staircases. A world where footsteps were soft, lamps were dim, and life began long before the first rays of sunlight reached the tall windows above. This is the story of a single day lived as a Victorian servant, a day shaped by routine, silence, and the quiet rhythm of unseen hands, a day that begins not with sound but with stillness. The air was cold in the servants' quarters, not painfully cold, just sharp enough that my breath rose in faint mist as I pushed away the thin wool blanket. The room was narrow, built more for practicality than comfort, with low beams crossing above and a small, round window set deep into the stone wall. Through the glass, the sky outside was a muted gray, neither night nor morning, suspended in that quiet hour when the world holds its breath. My small wooden bed creaked softly as I sat up. The mattress was filled with straw, flattened in places, shifting gently beneath me. I could hear faint sounds through the floorboards. Not footsteps, not voices, but the quiet hum of a large house at rest. Old timbers settling, pipes holding the night's chill, the muffled, distant tick of a grandfather clock somewhere upstairs. Even the silence had weight in a Victorian estate. I reached for the candle on the bedside table. The match scraped softly as it flared to life, its brief spark reflecting in the small mirror hung beside the wash basin. The candle flame steadied, warming the space just slightly, casting golden patches of light across the uneven walls. My eyes adjusted slowly. Shadows stretched long, clinging to the corners of the room as if reluctant to leave. In the servants' quarters, the day did not begin with sunlight. There was no waiting for dawn, no listening for birds, no lingering in bed until warmth touched the windows. Here, the day began with discipline, with duty, with a rhythm older than habit and heavier than expectation. I dipped my hands into the basin. Cold water bit at my skin, sending a quick shiver through me. I splashed my face, the chill forcing my mind awake, sharpening my senses. A Victorian servant's morning did not ease you into wakefulness. It plunged you into it. There was no softness here, only routine. I dried my face on a rough cloth towel and dressed quietly. Wool trousers slightly too coarse, a linen shirt crisp but cold against my skin, a dark waistcoat fitted but worn in places. Everything practical, everything meant to withstand work. As I laced my boots, I listened. There were no voices yet, no bells, no footsteps overhead, but the house spoke in other ways. A faint draft moved under the door. The distant rumble of a coal delivery wagon far down the lane. The soft beating of my own heart in the quiet. The Victorian estate above me belonged to another world. A world of warm beds, embroidered curtains, polished staircases and quiet luxury. A world that slept peacefully until long after our day had begun. But here, beneath the floors and behind the scenes, life moved with a different rhythm. A servant's world was built on anticipation. You rose before the household so the fires would glow before they opened their eyes. You worked in silence so their world seemed effortless. You moved unseen so their comfort felt natural. The candle flickered slightly as I stood and reached for my coat. Its edges were slightly frayed from constant use, the dark fabric smelling faintly of smoke and soap. I slipped it on, feeling its comfortable weight. Then came the first sound of morning. A single bell, soft, not urgent, but definite. It rang from the servants' corridor just once, but that was enough. Its purpose wasn't to call us. It was simply tradition, a quiet signal. The day had officially begun. I opened my door and stepped into the narrow hallway, where the gas lamps were turned low but glowing faintly. Their soft whir mingled with the cold, making the air feel both alive and still at once. Doors along the corridor began opening, one by one, each servant stepping out with the same quiet intention, the same practiced grace. No one spoke. Words were unnecessary. Every person knew their duties as intimately as their own heartbeat. I walked down the staircase reserved for staff, steeper and narrower than anything in the main house, tucked behind a wall panel so guests would never see it. The wood was worn smooth by countless footsteps, generations of servants who had lived this same rhythm, followed this same path into the early morning chill. At the bottom of the stairs, the air smelled faintly of coal dust and soap, warm iron and rising bread. The kitchen was still dark, but a soft glow spilled from the open doorway of the scullery, where a single lantern flickered. My first task waited for me there. Fire lighting, the true beginning of every Victorian servant's day. Not just one fire, but nearly 20. Drawing room, library, morning room, master bedroom, children's rooms, music room, guest chamber, and more. Every room had a fireplace, and every fireplace needed warmth before the family's footsteps touched the floor. I lifted the coal scuttle by its iron handle. The metal was cold, sending a chill through my fingers. I carried it carefully, the coal pieces shifting softly with each step. The house above me was entirely dark, but the walls seemed to breathe with age, holding centuries of quiet stories within their wooden frames. As I moved through the servants' passage, the faint scent of old books drifted from the library door. Warmth from yesterday's fire lingered in the drawing room. Even the darkness felt lived in, layered with history. In the first room, I knelt and cleared the old ashes. Soft gray dust rose in gentle clouds, catching the low light. I built the new fire slowly, placing logs and kindling with practiced precision. Then came the moment of breath. The match, the spark, the flame catching gently on the wood. It grew slowly, softly, spreading warm light across the hearth and illuminating the room with a gentle orange glow. It was the first warmth the house had felt since the previous night, a quiet revival in the stillness of dawn. One room done, 18 more to go. I moved quietly through the mansion. Carpets muffled my footsteps. Shadows shifted softly. Candles flickered with each passing draft. The air grew warmer with every fireplace that came to life. By the time I reached the last bedroom, I noticed the faintest hint of sunrise touching the upper windows, a pale line of light stretching across the ceiling. The world was waking. But our morning was far from over. Shoes to polish, silver to clean, tea trays to prepare, laundry to collect, wood to bring in, hallways to dust. Each task carried the same quiet patience, the same invisible craftsmanship. In the servant's world, the goal was simple: create comfort without being seen, shape silence into service, move like part of the house itself, steady, reliable, unnoticed. As the first true light of morning began to fill the grand hall above me, I paused for a moment, holding the soft hum of the house in my chest. A Victorian servant's day was long, but its rhythm was strangely peaceful, methodical, steady, almost meditative. And this was only the quiet beginning. The faint light of early morning seeped gently through the tall windows of the upper floors, touching the grand staircases and carved banisters long before it ever reached the servants' quarters. Up here, the world felt different, quiet in a refined way, not simply silent. As though every piece of furniture, every framed portrait, every polished bit of brass had been waiting politely for dawn to arrive. I stood at the edge of the main hallway, watching the soft golden glow stretch across the patterned carpet. The house, still mostly asleep, held its breath in a different rhythm now. Less heavy, more expectant. This was the moment when the two separate worlds, the servants below and the family above, came closest to touching. In this early hour, the mansion was neither ruled by footsteps nor by silence. It existed in a strange gray space between. The fires I'd lit were glowing warmly behind me. Their heat slowly chased away the last traces of the night's chill, and thin streams of smoke curled upward through the iron chimneys. I could feel the warmth on my back, spreading in waves each time I passed near a hearth. The glow made the dark wood of the furniture look softer, almost amber in the filtered light. But the peace would not last long. Soon the bells would ring. The bells were the true rulers of a Victorian servant's life. Small brass discs mounted discreetly along the servants' corridor, each attached to a particular room by a thin wire hidden inside the walls. When a member of the household pulled a cord in their room, the corresponding bell vibrated with a sharp metallic hum, and a small tag beneath it swung back and forth, telling us exactly who required attention. Some bells hardly moved at all. Others rang constantly from dawn till dusk. Each had its own personality, its own rhythm. But for now, just for a moment, They were still. I turned toward the servants' staircase, heading back down to the kitchen. I could smell warm bread already rising in the ovens below, mingling with the familiar scents of yeast, flour, and faint wood smoke. The kitchen was the heart of the servants' world, a warm refuge where the cold morning slowly softened into comfort. As I descended the narrow staircase, voices drifted up to meet me. Soft, muted, respectful voices. Morning greetings exchanged in quiet tones, the kind that carried no excitement, only gentle acknowledgement. Good morning. Cold start, isn't it? Fire's already burning. Tea's on. It was not conversation for pleasure, but for rhythm. Words used the way one uses kindling, to warm the moment slightly, to spark the day into motion. When I stepped into the kitchen, heat washed over me. The warmth felt almost heavy after the chilled hallways above. Copper pots hung from overhead racks, reflecting flickers of orange from the hearth fire. The stone floor was uneven from generations of footsteps, worn smooth at the center and rough near the edges. The cook was already at the large wooden table, her sleeves rolled high and her apron dusted with flour. She did not look up immediately. She had the same relationship with mornings that a blacksmith had with metal. Nothing began until she shaped it. She gave a small nod of acknowledgement when she finally glanced my way. "You're late to the warm room," she said softly. Not a rebuke, just an observation. "It's cold upstairs," I replied. "The fires took a bit longer today." She grunted in a way that might have been understanding, or agreement, or simply concentration. With cooks, it was always hard to tell. I grabbed a cloth and began polishing the line of teapots along the edge of the table. Some were silver, some brass, all of them slightly tarnished from the night's cool air. Each one needed to look perfect before the breakfast trays were assembled and carried, silently and efficiently, up the back staircase. A tea service in a Victorian home was not simply a task. It was an art. Too hot and it scalded, too cool and it insulted, too weak and it betrayed inattention, too strong and it revealed impatience. Every detail mattered. Steam rose from the kettle in a thin, shimmering stream. The cook lifted the lid of a bubbling pot, the smell of oats and cream filling the kitchen. On the other side of the room, the scullery maid stood over a basin of warm, soapy water, scrubbing yesterday's dishes with rhythmic, practiced motions. The air felt alive down here, the opposite of the grand, silent halls above. Down here, life had sound. The crackle of the stove, the clatter of utensils, the low murmur of voices, the rustle of aprons brushing against wooden tables. It was a different kind of music, the music of work. My next morning task was simple: collect the boots. Dozens of them. From the master's tall leather riding boots to the children's polished school shoes to the many pairs worn by guests who rotated through the mansion each season. Every boot had to be cleaned, brushed, polished, buffed, and set neatly outside the corresponding door. I stepped into the boot room, a small chamber lined with rows of shelves. Some pairs had already been brought down in baskets. Others waited upstairs, placed neatly outside rooms late the previous night. One by one, I brought them to the small table by the window. The process was calming, predictable, almost meditative. First the brush to remove dirt and dust, then the stiff cloth to revive the leather, then the polish, deep brown or shining black worked in slow circles, then the final buffing, leaving the surface smooth and gleaming. Each pair had its own history: scratches near the heel, a crease across the arch, a faint mark from the muddy garden path, footsteps leaving their story in the leather. The rising sun peeked through the high window, casting pale gold across the boots as I worked. Outside, faint birdsong finally began, late but gentle. Even nature seemed to move slowly in a Victorian morning. By the time I finished the last pair, the mansion above was stirring. Not loudly, never loudly, but unmistakably. A door closed softly in an upstairs corridor. A child's thin footsteps pattered across a carpeted landing. A distant cough from the master's dressing room. And then, the first bell, a sharp, bright ring, clear, distinct, echoing along the servants' hallway. The tag beneath it swung gently, revealing the lettering. Morning room. A request. A need. The day had officially begun. Before I could respond, a second bell chimed, then a third, each with its own tone, its own urgency. Gentle bedroom. North guest suite. Ladies' dressing chamber. The house was waking steadily now, blooming from slumber into motion. I took a slow breath, savoring the final moment of calm before the real work began. The long day ahead would demand energy, patience, silence, and grace. But for now, just now, I let the warmth from the kitchen fire settle into me, anchoring me for the hours ahead. This was the rhythm of a servant's life. Early mornings, quiet service, invisible labor, and the steady hum of a world that never rested. And the story of this single day had only just begun. The bells continued their delicate chiming, one after the other, each one a small ripple spreading through the servants' corridor. They weren't loud, not enough to startle or disrupt, but precise, clear, and unmistakably commanding. Each bell asked for attention, and each one expected it promptly. I stepped into the hallway, the soft hum of the house gathering momentum around me. Somewhere overhead, the master's footsteps crossed the floorboards with measured calm. The lady's maid hurried lightly toward her mistress's chamber, her shoes whispering against the upper carpet. The butler's deep, steady stride echoed faintly from the main staircase. Everything was moving now, gently but undeniably. The mansion was shedding its slow dawn stillness and settling into the intricate routine of a Victorian morning. The first bell I answered was from the morning room. This room, unlike the grand drawing room or the formal parlor, carried an airy, bright quality. It was where the family preferred to ease into their day, not with splendor, but with comfort. By the time I arrived, the fire I had lit earlier had grown into a steady, warm glow, throwing delicate patterns across the wallpaper and rug. My task here was simple: open the curtains. But in a Victorian house, even something as small as drawing back a curtain required intention. The heavy fabric embroidered with fine golden thread must not drag or wrinkle. Each pleat must fall evenly. Each fold must hang gracefully. So I took the edge of the drapery and eased the cloth aside with slow, practiced precision. Morning light spilled into the room, soft and cool. Not bright, not yet, but gentle, diffused by the lingering mist on the glass. It touched the furniture, revealing polished mahogany surfaces, the subtle sheen of velvet upholstery, and tiny flecks of dust that danced like drifting snowflakes in its path. I straightened the small stack of newspapers set beside the armchair, rearranged the cushion slightly, adjusted the brass clock on the mantelpiece by a single inch, making its placement symmetrical once more. These small adjustments were not commanded but expected, part of the invisible artistry of service. As I turned to leave, I paused for the briefest moment to take in the warmth of the room, the gentle light, and the quiet hush that lingered there. This would soon be a place of conversation, tea, and footsteps. But for now it was calm, still, balanced. Back in the corridor, another bell chimed, a sharper one this time. Ladies' dressing room. I made my way up the narrow servants' staircase, carrying a small tray of steaming water and folded cloths. The stairs spiraled tightly, hidden behind the walls and unseen from the main hallways. The sound of my footsteps was muffled, absorbed by the polished wood. Upon reaching the ladies' chamber, I knocked softly and waited. Her maid opened the door with a nod, taking the tray from my hands. The room beyond, though I did not enter, glowed with the soft light of a fire, the shimmer of silk ribbons, and the faint scent of lavender water. This was the world of the upper family, warm, gentle, protected, a world I served, but never stepped into unless invited. I moved on to the next task, delivering the breakfast trays. Down in the kitchen, the air was warmer now, almost bustling. The cook moved with surprising agility for someone of her age, stirring porridge with one hand while checking pastry trays with the other. The sideboard held an array of delicate china plates, each hand painted with floral patterns and edged in gold. Teapots steamed lightly, lids trembling as tiny clouds of vapor escaped. The trays were arranged with precision, silver cutlery polished to mirror-like perfection, freshly baked rolls wrapped in linen to retain warmth, small pots of butter and thick amber marmalade, perfectly steeped tea in porcelain cups, a folded napkin placed just so. I carried the master's tray first. The weight was familiar, balanced in both hands, the silver teapot warm against my palm. Upstairs, the master's room was filled with soft morning amber. He was already awake, seated in his large leather chair, reading spectacles perched low on his nose. His voice was steady, calm, without warmth, but without irritation. "Thank you," he murmured, as I placed the tray on the small table. I stepped back, bowed my head slightly, and left without a sound. Next was the children's schoolroom. 2 small plates of rolls, a bowl of warm porridge each, a pitcher of milk, a single vase with a tiny sprig of baby's breath, placed by the children's governess. The schoolroom was brighter than the rest of the house, with sunlight spilling freely across the wooden desks and maps pinned to the walls. The chalkboard still held faint marks from yesterday's lessons, arithmetic in pale white lines. When I set the tray down, I noticed a small wooden toy soldier lying on its side near the window. Its paint was chipped, its arm bent slightly. Without thinking much of it, I stood it upright again, letting it rest against the sill where the morning light painted its little helmet gold. As I left the room, I heard laughter from far down the hallway. Light, cheerful, belonging unmistakably to a child who had just woken up. It echoed against the walls, filling the air with a playful warmth unseen in the servants' quarters. The last of the morning trays went to the ladies' sitting room. Here I moved with extra care. Her space was delicate, her preferences exact. Her tea had to be poured immediately, not a moment too early, not a moment too late. She preferred her cup placed to the left of her plate. The spoon angled perfectly at 2 o'clock, the saucer edge aligned with the lace doily beneath it. I arranged everything precisely, then stepped back. And at that moment, the bells began again. Library, upper hallway, guest chamber, master's wardrobe. The house was now fully alive, doors opening softly, footsteps moving in every direction, voices murmuring, the rustle of dresses and the click of pocket watches, the chiming of the large clock in the foyer marking the hour, and below it all the steady, unbroken rhythm of service. This was the Victorian morning routine, not rushed, not frantic, but deliberate, unending. A dance performed daily, quietly, faithfully. I took a slow breath and made my way toward the library, the next task awaiting, the next quiet room needing attention. The day would be long. The hours would stretch gently ahead. But in this work, there was a strange comfort, a method, a certainty, a rhythm that soothed in its predictability. And this was still only the beginning. The library was always my favorite room in the entire estate. Not because it was grand, although it certainly was with its soaring shelves and polished mahogany ladders, but because it held a kind of gentle silence that seemed older than the house itself. A silence that didn't feel empty. It felt alive. When I stepped inside, the morning light filtered through tall windows lined with frosted glass, softening the world into muted gold. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air, moving like tiny dancers suspended in slow motion. They shifted whenever I passed, rising gently in the faint warmth of the newly lit fire. Before touching anything, I stood still a moment, not to rest, but to listen. Every room had a different silence. The drawing room's silence was elegant and polished. The nursery silence was playful and thin. The servants' hall's silence was crowded and tired. But the library's silence, it breathed. Books held their own quiet, leather spines creaking slightly with changes in temperature, old paper releasing the faintest earthy scent. I could hear the distant ticking of the mantel clock, the soft crackle of the fire behind me, and nothing more. This quiet was part of my work, part of the rhythm of each day. I began by straightening a few volumes that had shifted on the desk overnight. A folded newspaper lay beside them, untouched since yesterday, its edges curling slightly. I smoothed them with a gentle hand, aligning the corners until they rested neatly. Next was dusting. Not vigorous, not hurried, a slow, careful movement that followed the grain of the wood, preserving the smooth sheen the butler prized. The feather duster whispered across the shelves, leaving faint trails of clean wood beneath. The carvings along the edges, tiny leaves, delicate scroll work, a row of miniature lions' heads, caught the morning light as I worked. Their details, invisible in the dark, emerged softly, mellowed by time and countless previous mornings. As I finished, another bell chimed faintly. Not urgent, not sharp, just a reminder. Upper hallway. I made my way out of the library and back into the corridor, closing the door behind me without a sound. The hallway upstairs was brightening now, sunlight stretching slowly across the patterned carpet and climbing up the grand staircase in long golden stripes. My task here was simple. Dust the banisters and polish the stair rods. This was careful work. The stair rods, brass, slender, gleaming, ran horizontally across each step. They needed to shine perfectly, catching light just enough to look elegant but not glaring. I knelt at the bottom step and began polishing the rods one by one, breathing softly as I worked. The cloth glided over the metal, bringing out a warm sheen that contrasted beautifully against the deep red runner beneath it. Above me, faint voices drifted from the family's private corridor. The lady's gentle conversation with her maid, the master's deliberate, calm footsteps, the governess reminding the children to dress properly, soft laughter from the young daughter, a door closing quietly, all of it mixed with the distant coo of pigeons outside the window and the steady ticking of the long case clock in the foyer. By the time I reached the top step, the house's rhythm had settled into full motion, not busy, not chaotic, just alive. I stood, brushed off my waistcoat, and turned to the next task, the upper hallway mirrors. These mirrors were no ordinary pieces. Tall, ornate, edged in golden leafing and carved with delicate floral spirals. They reflected the morning light in soft glimmers, adding brightness to the hallway without overpowering it. I dipped a cloth into warm water and wrung it out carefully. Each wipe had to be slow, smooth, uninterrupted. Too much pressure left streaks. Too little left prints. The cloth glided across the glass in long, even movements. First the corners, then the center, then the delicate edges. My reflection appeared as I worked, faint and fleeting, distorted slightly by the curves of the frame. It was always strange seeing myself in these mirrors. Servants were not supposed to reflect in the upper world. We existed behind the scenes, moving quietly beneath the surface. But in these moments, the mirror did not judge. It simply showed what was there. As I finished the last mirror, a soft tapping of shoes approached. Polished, quick, clearly belonging to someone of the family. I stepped aside instantly, bowing my head slightly. It was the governess. She gave me a polite, practiced nod, the kind that acknowledged presence but never invited conversation. Her hands were full of books, a stack for the children's lessons. The faint scent of lavender followed her as she walked past. The children trailed behind her, not loudly but with youthful energy that bounced softly off the walls. The boy held a globe-shaped toy under his arm. The girl skipped lightly, her curls catching the light. They whispered to each other in that half-excited, half-sleepy way children often do in the mornings. Their footsteps faded as they entered the schoolroom, and once more the hallway settled into quiet. My next task took me to the guest rooms, each needing fresh linens and a soft brushing of the carpets. The room smelled faintly of lavender sachets placed under pillows and the lingering warmth of last night's fires. I smoothed each bed carefully, flattening wrinkles, straightening edges, tucking corners with crisp precision. The sunlight in these rooms fell differently, filtered through lace curtains that cast delicate patterns across the floors. Dust motes danced in the beams. A gentle breeze rustled the edges of the curtains, carrying the faint scent of the garden below, damp earth and morning dew. One room at a time, I moved with slow, deliberate intention. No rushed steps, no harsh motions, just quiet, steady service. When the last guest bed was made, I opened the windows slightly to let in the cool air. Down in the courtyard, I saw gardeners trimming hedges, their movements steady and rhythmic. A horse-drawn carriage rolled up the gravel path, wheels crunching softly. The stable boy walked alongside a brown mare, patting its neck gently as he led it toward the barn. The outside world was waking too, but even there the rhythm was slow, patient. By the time I finished the guest rooms, the sun had risen fully, bathing the upper floors in warm gold. Downstairs, the butler's voice carried through the main hallway. Prepare the dining room. Another task. Another quiet rhythm. Another step into the mid-morning routine. I took a breath and headed toward the main staircase, moving silently along the polished wood, the faint hum of the household surrounding me on all sides. The Victorian morning was unfolding with perfect precision, and there were still so many hours to go. The dining room always felt like entering another world. A world quiet in a different way than the library, bright in a different way than the morning rooms, and formal in a way that softened the moment you stepped inside. The tall windows were half draped, letting in a soft sheet of warm daylight that spilled across the long table. Every polished surface caught the glow, the gleam of silver, the crystalline shimmer of the chandeliers, the deep reddish warmth of the mahogany furniture. It was a room meant for ceremony. Not grand ceremony, but daily ceremony. The ceremony of order. The ceremony of rhythm. The butler stood near the head of the table, hands folded behind his back, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. The slight tilt of his chin told me he had already inspected the room. His glance toward the doorway told me he expected the rest to be done with smooth precision. We speak little in this room. Words feel too heavy among the polished wood and quiet elegance. Instead, the room demands presence, not conversation. The butler nodded once, a signal, not a greeting, and left to oversee the silver warming in the butler's pantry. I began my work. The tablecloth came first. A long sheet of heavy linen, pristine white, folded with military precision. Unfolding it was an art. It had to cascade smoothly across the table without snagging or wrinkling. I held each corner carefully, allowing the fabric to settle in a soft, perfect drift until it lay flat. Then came the runner, a deep maroon cloth embroidered subtly with gold thread in patterns of vines and leaves. Its ends needed to fall exactly even with each other. A misaligned runner could throw off the entire symmetry of the table, something the lady would notice with a single glance. Next, the place settings, each piece of silverware precisely positioned. Fork to the left, knife to the right, dessert spoon above, glass aligned with the knife's tip, bread plate angled at a soft diagonal. The dining room was still completely empty. No voices, no footsteps, no presence of the family. Yet the work required made it feel full, as though the expectations of the household sat quietly in every corner, watching, waiting. I polished each spoon until the surface caught the morning light. Circular motions, soft pressure, a quiet rhythmic breath. The faint scent of beeswax polish drifted from the sideboard where I had prepared it earlier. Mixing with it was the gentle aroma of roses, a vase of fresh-cut flowers arranged by the housemaid now resting at the center of the table. Their petals glowed softly in the warm daylight. After the silver came the napkins, folded in a delicate fan shape, placed carefully on each plate. Their edges aligned perfectly with the plate's curves. It was slow work, meditative, almost like embroidery, but performed with cloth and air. There is comfort in this precision, a sense of rightness when everything falls into place. The quiet pride of creating beauty that will disappear within an hour, only to be created again tomorrow. When the table was set, I lit the candles, tall, tapered ivory white. Their flames flickered briefly, then steadied, casting a gentle amber glow against the crystal glasses. The entire room warmed slightly, the air trembling with the soft heat of 20 tiny flames. The butler returned, inspecting the table silently. One candle slightly tilted, I straightened it. One glass an inch too close to its plate, I adjusted it. A single fold in a napkin too tight, I smoothed it. He gave a quiet nod. Approval. It was one of few unspoken compliments in a servant's life. A nod from the butler. As he walked away, the distant echo of children laughing drifted down from the hallway above. Their footsteps pattered across the upper floor, a reminder that this house lived many different lives at the same time. I carried a tray of water jugs and placed them gently onto the sideboard. Each jug filled to the same level, each handle angled identically outward. Movement above the stairs signaled the approach of the family. Soft footsteps, light conversation, a rustling of skirts brushing along the banisters. The faint scent of perfume drifting downward. It was nearly midday. The family would be seated soon. Our presence would fade into the background then. Quiet hands pouring water, silent feet moving behind chairs, gentle precision in every motion. But before the family entered, there was one last task. Check the fire. I knelt by the hearth, the warmth soothing after the chill of the morning corridors. The logs I'd arranged earlier had burned down into glowing embers, flickering with steady light. I added 2 small logs, angled to catch the heat, and watched the flames curl upward. The firelight cast soft ripples across the silverware, making the entire table shimmer. The house was ready, and as the family descended the stairs, voices drifting, footsteps approaching, the butler stepping forward with silent dignity, I stepped back into the corner, blending into the background, where servants belonged during mealtimes. Invisible, steady, fluid, and essential. The quiet hours before noon were complete. The afternoon would bring its own rhythm, gentler, slower, in some ways heavier, and full of new tasks waiting patiently in the long unfolding day of Victorian service. The last hours of the medieval night. The wind softened as the village settled into the final stretch of the night. Lamps dimmed, footsteps faded, and I felt the deep, ancient quiet fold over everything like a woolen blanket. The air carried the faint smell of warm herbs drifting out of cottage windows, and the crackle of the last embers of the hearths could still be heard if one listened closely enough. I stepped outside for a moment, wanting to feel the village in its true midnight stillness. The sky was a rich, endless dark blue, brighter than modern cities ever allow it to be. Stars were scattered across it like tiny flecks of ground salt. The moon sat low, milky and soft, touching the rooftops with a pale glow. It wasn't a sharp night. It wasn't cold enough to bother the skin. It felt like the entire world had taken one deep breath and hadn't exhaled yet. A quiet shape moved near the well, just an old cat stretching, then curling itself beside a wooden bucket to sleep. Even the animals seemed to know that human time had ended for the day. I walked back through the narrow dirt path, past the tiny gardens and fenced herbs, and approached the small cottage that had been my shelter through this medieval day. The wooden door creaked as I entered, the kind of creak only old wood makes, low and weary, but familiar. Inside, the fire was now nothing more than a faint red glow. The shadows on the walls swayed slowly, stretching tall, shrinking small, gently breathing in the dim light. It felt like stepping into someone else's dream. I sat on a wooden stool near the hearth. My entire body felt tired, but in a way that wasn't draining. It was a soft, earned tiredness, the kind that comes after working with your hands, moving slowly, doing simple things with care. My shoulders had relaxed. My thoughts were empty and clean. Time had softened around me. I could still smell the mix of rosemary and dried lavender hanging above the door. It was calming, almost like the room itself was trying to lull anyone inside toward rest. I reached for the small clay cup left earlier on the table. The herbal infusion had cooled completely, but even cold, the scent rose gently when I lifted it. Sweet, grassy, with a hint of something earthy. I drank it slowly, as the villagers did, as though nighttime wasn't something to rush into, but something to ease toward. The cup made a soft thud when I set it down. A tiny sound in a world that had gone almost silent. I moved toward the sleeping corner of the cottage. A simple straw mattress covered with a rough wool blanket. Nothing soft, nothing luxurious. But in the quiet of this hour it felt exactly right. The blanket smelled faintly of smoke from the hearth and sun-dried wool, a scent so simple and grounded that it pulled me even deeper into stillness. I lay down, letting my body sink into the straw's uneven support. I could feel the gentle shift beneath me as the stems adjusted. The blanket settled over my chest with comforting weight. A single oil lamp burned in the corner, its flame small and tired, flickering like it was trying to stay awake just long enough to say goodnight. The sounds of the medieval night drifted through the wooden walls. A distant owl, the soft rustle of the thatched roof as the breeze touched it. A faint rhythmic creak from the hanging herbs swaying gently overhead. It was like being wrapped inside a timeless cocoon. Breathing slowed. The mind loosened its grip on the day. The stillness grew thicker, warmer. As my eyes closed, I thought about how different life was here. No rush, no screens, no noise. Only tasks done with hands, meals cooked slowly, stories shared by lamplight, and nights that belonged entirely to rest. There was no pressure to be anywhere else. No urgency to finish anything before sleep, just the soft ancient rhythm of the Middle Ages, humming like a familiar lullaby. The oil lamp's flame fluttered once, twice, then gave into the darkness. The room dimmed fully, leaving only the glow of sleeping embers by the hearth. The world outside breathed quietly. The world inside drifted even quieter. And somewhere between the faint crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of the wind slipping past the cottage walls, The medieval night gently closed its eyes. And I did too.